Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism. Your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you are tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Mormon Newscast. It is May 19th, 2025. And we have a little bit of breaking news. This came right before we went live. It's the reason we're just a few minutes late. This is the weirdest thing. And Rebecca, I'm really sorry. I hope this is okay with you. I just want to note something. We had a listener of the Mormon discussion platform reach out to us in a text message to RFM and myself to notify us that there is an imitation podcast out there, and actually several of them. And so the two that we're aware of, I haven't checked the others under the umbrella, but the two that we're aware of are the main ones, which are Mormon Discussion that started in 2012 and Radio Free Mormon. You said you started in 2017, 2016.
16.
Yeah, okay. And somebody is out there. I'll just put this up on the screen. This is Radio Free Mormon on Apple Podcast, and it's on Spotify as well. And Mormon Discussions is out there too. I didn't get a chance to pick this up, but I did see it in the text message from the person who's informing us. And there's episodes out there, and I'll just play one of them for just a second here.
I hope it's me.
It's not going to be you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. Today we're going to be
barely
talking
hear
to
it.
Grace Sala a little bit about her faith and testimony in Jesus Christ and some of the things that she's done to help.
That's as loud as it gets, but it's somebody else and talking. It seems like maybe it could be an AI voice.
Well, he identifies himself as Jaden Schaefer. I don't know that that's necessarily his real name. It could be.
Yeah, I don't think it's a real person, but if it is, that's even better for us.
I know Radio Free Mormon is my real name.
Yeah. So out there, folks will need to be careful. There are folks imitating us. Now, we've run into some imitation lately, so it does have me wondering.
It's the sincerest form of flattery, they say, Bill.
Yeah, but not in this way. This won't fly, as you and I both well know. No. I will note whoever this is, that will be handled in the immediate future, and it would be best if these just disappeared on your own. So I would suggest making them vanish. I highly doubt this is the LDS Church in any way doing something that it would seem outside the realms of the kind of thing they would do. This is somebody who's trying to, as from a believing perspective, detract people from finding you and I, RFM.
Yes, that's what I would think.
How long have these been up?
Since April, it looks like.
Okay, yeah, so just a little bit. And they all have a faithful sort of a content as far as what you've listened to so far.
April 18th is when this earliest one goes out. And each one is only, really short. 7 minutes, 17 minutes, 17 minutes. But each one.
There's Hinkley Kaupua, who may be the person speaking in that one, or representative speaking in that one. I used to know a family up here named Kaupua.
I want to talk about Holy Week. This is one of the most cherished weeks in all of Christianity.
So there you go. There's a hot new podcast out there, but I don't think it's going to be up too long. So folks, just be careful. Anything else you guys want to say about this? Otherwise, I was quite surprised to see that happening.
Yeah, there's a guy named Kaupua in the stake presidency where I live. Before the stake presidency. I don't know what he's doing now. And I expect that there are more than one Kaupua out there in the world of Mormonism.
Now, my hunch, well, I don't know if I want to share much of my hunch, but I'll say that it seems like there's different hosts for each of these. Mm-hmm. And it looks like on some level it's AI content is my hunch, because it seems really crazy to have somebody put their real name on something doing this kind of stuff. So
almost as crazy as doing it under Radio Free Mormon.
Yeah, is there any information in the show notes that gives you like contact information?
No, none of that. Okay. So I'll be reaching out after this show or first thing tomorrow morning to Spotify, Apple, and all the other podcast places, and make it clear that somebody is breaking rules.
The law.
Yeah, breaking the law. So, anyway, I'll take that off. Welcome to the newscast, everyone. We're super glad that you guys are here.
Oh, yes.
We've got a great show lined up for you. I'll just go over, by the way, I'll just introduce Rebecca Biblioteca from Mormonish, Radio Free Mormon, the host of Radio Free Mormon and the co-host with Mormonism Live. How are the two of you guys doing tonight?
Fabulous.
I'm doing great. I want to make it clear I'm the host of the real Radio Free Mormon show.
We're the real thing. I almost was half thinking he would start off at least going testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3, but he doesn't even do that.
No. It shows a unique lack of creativity.
Yeah. It would really suck if we found out this was somebody who's been doing things like this in the past. So we'll see what happens.
Is that what your hunch is?
That's what my hunch is.
Oh, I can't wait to
wow.
debrief after the show.
Yeah,
Nothing's more fun than debriefing with Bill after the show, I always say.
There you go.
I wonder if there's a Mormon Stories clone too. I mean, I wonder if this person is doing this to other platforms.
Yeah. It's a weird thing, isn't it? To be let's just assume for a moment it's a believing Mormon, which I think there's a chance of that as well. If you're a believing Mormon who prides yourself on being an active, worthy, believing Latter-day Saint who maintains certain standards of ethics and honesty and morality and want to be temple worthy, it'd be a strange thing to then create fake podcast under fake names and perpetrate a fraud in order to detract people from finding the real material that helps them leave.
Desperate times call for desperate measures, my friend. This is why when I posted it on my Facebook page, I said it appears some good Mormon going by the name of Jaden Schaefer has commenced posting faith-promoting material under Bales and Might Nom de Guerres. I don't think this will end well. But that's why I made it clear. Yeah, you have to be a good Mormon to lie this despicably for God.
I feel like maybe someone's been called on a mission to do this. I mean, sometimes I feel like that in, my different platforms. I have commenters that are faithful, that are there all the time, right? In fact, I feel like we're friends now. I could name them off. There's about 3 of them that all the time I will post something and within seconds, the faithful point of view will be there. And it just makes me wonder if people are calling themselves on missions to, sort of keep tabs on our content. I don't know. It's interesting. It makes the chat interesting. It makes posting interesting. The dialogue, goes back and forth, but there are several that I feel like, we should all go out to dinner or something. I feel like I know you so well. You know who I'm talking about.
I think wherever Elder Kevin Pearson goes, he's heard to exclaim, "Will no one rid me of these turbulent podcasters?"
We talked about this before to show the cavalry.
Oh yeah.
The Calvary. It was one of the two, whichever name.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Cavalry saves the day.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing. There's a box of people it can be. We'll get to the bottom of it. It'll be hard to imagine these last very long. So, all right, folks, we've got a great show lined up for you tonight. The newscast here. Let me put these up on the screen. Top stories tonight. LDS Church loses billions to Liberation Day. I'll be sharing that story with you. We've got BYU Medical School update. That is Rebecca Biblioteca. No porn for you. And I don't know, is this gentleman a Utah? He's
a United States Senator from Utah, Mike Lee. Yes.
There you go. So that story will be brought to you by RFM. We've got
Utah or any other state.
There you go.
Everywhere.
Will be talked about by Rebecca Biblioteca. And it came to pass, proof of Book of Mormon.
That's me.
RFM as well. And then families together forever, not in Africa. I'll share a little tidbit on that story as well. And there might be another tidbit or two towards the end on other things. So we'll see how that goes. Let's start off with this story. I'll just note President Donald Trump's tariff turmoil cost the LDS Church billions of dollars. This was in the Salt Lake Tribune on May 17th. And I'll just note here, recent filings with the SEC shows that the investment portfolio managed by LDS Church's Ensign Peak Advisors has experienced a notable decline, according to recent filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The portfolio's value decreased by nearly $4 billion in the first quarter of 2025, dropping from an approximately $56 billion at the end of 24 to $52.3 billion. Man, that's sad, isn't it?
They're going to be out on the street if they don't stop this.
Yeah, they can't handle this. This downturn is largely attributed to market volatility spurred by President Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on foreign goods, which unsettled global markets. There were 5 things I wanted to just note for people's attention in
When is
this.
the first quarter of 2025, Bill?
That would be January, February, and March. Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with the tariffs, does it?
I just thought I'd ask. I
That's-
did know if they're using first quarter in the way that I think is commonly the way I use it.
Yeah, that's
and
really
there's not some kind of
strange.
term of art that would include April 2nd, then I don't know what that means.
That's really strange. I'll when you guys are working on your stories, I'll go take a look and see if I can figure out the discrepancy there. I'll just note they lost $4 billion in quarter one. Performance lag. Ensign Peak's portfolio underperformed the S&P 500
That's embarrassing.
with a 7% decline versus the index's 4.6 drop, influenced by strategy of reducing U.S. stock holdings.
A cunning plan.
Yeah. Number 3, continued tech investments. The fund maintains significant investments in major tech companies, but they have an increased stake in NVIDIA, and they reduced their value in Tesla holdings. Number 4, as of the latest report, the portfolio comprises 1,689 different investments, stock funds, bonds, all kinds of things, but down from a peak of 2,308 in mid-2022, indicating a trend toward consolidation.
And my understanding, Bill, is the reason that we're just getting this as a headline in this past week is because the information for the first quarter has to be released by the companies, but not until a certain amount of time after that quarter, whatever it is over. So maybe it's about 45 days or something after the quarter's over, they have to release it so that we don't get an insight into what they're doing right now, but what they were doing back then.
Yeah, correct. And so there's that. So they have decreased the number, and that makes sense, by the way. So as you're leading up to, Trump was pretty clear in announcing that those tariffs were coming. A lot of folks would reduce their holdings in the market, and it would make sense too on that end for that total amount to go down because you would move it over to cash holdings, waiting for that volatility to end, and then you would put it back in the market at some point. And so that's possible too, but it does look like they're not performing as well as even the S&P 500 index. And I just wanted to show that too. But the 5th point here is that Ensign Peak's holdings represent a portion of the LDS Church's estimated $293 billion in total assets. Again, this is in the $53 billion, whereas before they had 58 or so, 57. And then now they've got 53, I think it was just over that. And then total, again, the church's assets are $293 billion.
And Bill, if I can just clarify there,
please.
that 53 and 58 billion is exclusively the money that the LDS Church has invested in the United States stock market. And the
Through
SEC,
Ensign Peak.
yes, and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, requires that the quarterlies be made public and filed apparently within 45 days of the end of the last quarter. So we know that this is just the U.S. stock market. And there, of course, the church has investments outside the U.S. stock market and other stock markets and all sorts of things above and beyond stock markets, real estate, et cetera. And that total comes into around 293 billion. That's why there's a difference between the two.
And
I
remember the rumor that is there another Ensign Peak? Like, is there another entity, an investment entity that we don't even know about? A shadow one. That would be quite interesting, wouldn't it?
That doesn't even sound like a rumor. It just sounds like a question.
Yeah, it is a question, but it is a rumor too.
How quickly questions can become rumors.
Exactly.
I'll just note here, the Widows Mite report came out with their quarter one information. And I'm imagining that at least in part, this is where the Salt Lake Tribune is getting the information that they're using for this. But I'll just note a few things that I thought were interesting in the Widows Mite report. Same result with other benchmarks. Ensign Peak may use other popular cap-weighted benchmarks, such as the MSCI USA or the Russell 1000. Performance of these benchmarks is so similar to the S&P 500 that it makes little difference which is used to assess the EP's relative performance. Essentially, what that's saying is that the folks over at the Ensign Peak office are utilizing, as any investors would, they're utilizing the tools that are out there, but they are matching their investments extremely closely to the S&P 500, but not performing as well. And we'll see that in just a moment. So response to index additions, Ensign Peak appears to significantly increase its ownership of stocks that are added to the S&P 500 index, which suggests deliberate index tracking. In 2023 and 2024, on average, Ensign Peak more than doubled its holdings of 29 stocks immediately after they were added to the S&P 500 index. So they watch closely what goes on, what comes off, and as soon as that move is made, they adjust their portfolio to match that. And
yeah, my understanding is that because they weighted these wrong and picked bad stocks and not enough of the good ones, they ended up losing $4 billion. Have you already covered that, Bill?
they have lost $4 billion.
Yeah.
Now,
In this last, I mean, other than the big down, which has now come back up,
yeah.
I'm talking about $4 billion that they would have made if they had just strictly followed the S&P 500 index. So their monkeying with it here and there has ended up losing them $4 billion.
Yeah,
over
and I
the
wanna
This
last
is
quarter.
so funny because I keep saying this, that when I was growing up, the idea, at least my parents and other adults, was don't dabble in the stock market, right? It's like
Yes.
gambling. Okay.
Yes.
So when finally everybody decided, okay, I figured this out, they are investing things in the church, then the church would not mention how they were investing because they were afraid that everyone would follow them, right?
Mhm.
Make the same investments, be alluding to the
Yeah.
fact that their investments were so prophetic, right? That they're going to
Yeah.
do so well and we don't want you to follow them. Well, I guess this is good advice. Don't
It is.
follow them because they're doing far worse than anybody else.
That is a good point. They were
Yeah.
really reading the chicken entrails on this one.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you'll see this here. So to beat the market, Ensign Peak tries to own more of the index stocks that will beat the index and less of the rest as reflected in weight. So for instance, the big 7, they have a little less than what the S&P 500 does, but then as new things enter the S&P 500 index, they overweight those. Now, it's interesting to note the orange line here is the S&P 500 index.
Mhm.
The white line is Ensign Peak. In other words, Ensign Peak pays a bunch of people, the experts, to come in and try to do better than just put money in the S&P 500. If you go on to Fidelity or Vanguard or Charles Schwab, you open up an account, one of the funds you can just put money into is the S&P 500. And you then are invested in the top 500 companies on the market. And the church would actually do better with its investments if it did that. You could just, RFM, you said this before the show started, you only need one guy.
I thought it was you who said it because it was very clever.
No, it was yours.
They can fire everybody
I'll
in
take
that
it, it was
freaking Ensign Peak administrative office. Just put it on autopilot for being in the S&P 500. And not only would you have made $4 billion more in the last quarter, you'd save on all the overhead.
You could set up a shell company in Wyoming with one guy and a fax machine and a phone, and he could run the entire fund. And somebody in the chat, Guy McDude, mentioned it's also possible that they lose money because they do have a certain protocol as far as staying away from what are considered sin stocks. Other people know that those do really well. Victoria's Secret or cigarette or alcohol, who knows what they consider sin stocks. That was such a big deal in the 80s when they figured out that, oh my goodness, the church is investing in Coca-Cola, right? Or some kind of form of it. So I think that could be it too. They're handicapped in a way. They have handicapped themselves to stay away from the sin stocks.
I actually have some intelligence on this.
Ooh.
And with AI now, I mean, you can create AI agents who, without any person having to do the work, it could just do all of these things for you. We'll get to a fun little thing about this here in a moment. But again, just to note, the church is trying to model itself after the S&P 500, but do so in a way that weights the newest, freshest things coming in. And by going through all of that rigmarole, they end up having actually less money because it doesn't perform as well as the S&P 500. And so there is the orange line S&P 500, white line is Ensign Peak.
And Bill, the intelligence I
Yes.
had, and I hope I'm not going to goober this up because I was speaking with the widow's mite in person today. Well, over the phone. Okay. I was texting. So anyway, but it was the widow's mite. And there were two things that they had mentioned. And one was this thing about losing the 4 billion because they were monkeying with the S&P 500, losing 4 billion that they wouldn't have lost if they had just tracked it directly. And the other one was, do you remember, and I apologize because I don't have my phone with the text in it in front of me right now, Bill, but there was the EPA, and then it was discovered by the widow's mite that there was this other fund, of course, that was going on over here that had to do with the retirement systems for church employees. And they had a ton of money that they were investing. And then a lot of these issues got raised over there. Okay. The latest word that I have is that even though the stocks that the EPA invests in the US stock market are no longer sin stocks, over here with the retirement systems and their investments, yeah, they still have a bunch of sin stocks.
Really? That's surprising because that is the retirement fund, the DMBA. Like I said, I still have some 401k money left over there from my days at BYU. I never rolled it over. So how interesting. I'm going to have to write a letter if that's how they're investing my money. I don't like that.
Yes.
And so what you see on the screen now, again, you get the less 1.64%, less 1.64% from the S&P 500, I believe. The difference, and I'm not going to go into any of that because that's not my expertise. That's above my pay grade. Off to the right, the green is when Ensign Peak actually was doing better than the S&P 500, and the red is when it was actually doing worse. Again, the church, led by prophet, seers, and revelators, would have done better if it just followed the S&P 500 rather than having a bunch of temple recommend holding worthy Mormons using the Holy Ghost to try to perfect the method.
But they have prayer before every meeting.
Prayer before every meeting. Every day at work, it starts with a prayer.
I think it means that not only can the prophet not see around regular corners, he can't see around financial corners either.
No, he doesn't. And by the way, yes, I mean, if God really wanted these guys to have this much money, and he seems like he does because they were so willing to break the law to get there. And yet, for some reason, revelation is not part of this process because they're trying to copy a certain way of doing things, but then improve upon it, and they actually do worse in it. So
I think God was getting a little embarrassed about having so much money in his personal checking account. So he shaved 4 billion off by revelation.
Yeah. These are the companies that the church is invested in. Again, the gray line is how weighted it is in the S&P 500. So for instance, the number one company in the S&P 500, if you invest in that fund, has more of, if you were to put $100 in, it would have $7 of that 100 invested in Apple, for instance. And it'll have $6 in Microsoft and $5 in NVIDIA and so on and so forth. So it's weighted that way. And again, the church's way of doing things is to leave less weight on the top companies, and when something new enters the S&P 500, to overweight that, and they ended up doing worse. I just want to know, I'll just finish the story with a little tidbit, which is there is an app out there that you can download. It's called Dub. And if you have that app, what you can do is the purpose of the app is it says you can end up investing just like someone else that you want to follow. So for instance, Nancy Pelosi, whose husband works around the stock market, her family seems to do really well.
120%. Isn't that like crazy?
It is crazy. That politician, her household does really well with investing. It's almost like they have inside information.
Jerome Tracker seems to have an inside tracker too.
Yeah, Jerome Powell, yeah, his tracker, he does well. Bill Ackman's tracker, he does all right. I
would think Bill, who's that? Is that there's two trackers?
No. The tracker is what is the
I'm sorry.
itself. Jerome Powell is the federal.
I would have thought Bill Ackman. Okay, take out these other two. Take out Jerome and Nancy. I'm looking at Bill coming in at 22.75%, and I'm going, that's amazing. that's actually too good to believe. That's territory where someone's trying to lure you in to invest in stuff that they really don't have any investments. That's so high. So that's almost unbelievably high. Bill,
It's Bernie Madoff high.
Yes. Yes.
Ooh, yeah.
It's affinity fraud high. But when you get to Jerome and Nancy, get out of here. Something's up.
Jerome Powell and Nancy Pelosi, they do quite well in the market. I'll just note, though, this app allows you to follow a person or a investment group, and you can essentially push a button and your investments will model theirs. When they take money out of the market, yours comes out. When they rebalance things, yours rebalances. When you put things into someone, and when they put things into some fund or stock, all of a sudden your money goes into that too.
So Nancy makes money off of the this app or something?
No. This app allows you to copy real people in the real world, their investments.
But it's not revealed until like 45 days after that last quarter.
I don't know how they do it, but they know things in real time and they have it model those.
I would think that these people would have to agree to it.
Yeah, I don't know how this works. No, I don't think these people have anything to do with this. My whole point is showing this, by the way, was just to show that.
Oh yeah.
They
Sorry.
should make one. That's all right. They should make one for Ensign Peak. But the trouble is, you'd actually just be better off putting your money in the S&P 500.
I know, but all the Mormons would follow it, and they'd be so happy to be losing money.
They would. They'd be so. They wouldn't lose. They just wouldn't make as much as they could with just the standard bet.
Yes.
And I should note, you said this already. By now, with the way the stock market has gotten back up to its levels since April 2nd, it's essentially guaranteed that the church has made up that $4 billion it lost from the market, whatever it did to rebalance things or cash out for a minute while the market was heading towards volatility. So I'll just note that. Any questions from you guys? Any thoughts from you guys on the Lord's one true church copying something and doing worse at it than the originator?
Yeah. Again, they make about $85 million a day, I think is what the calculation is. So it doesn't mean much, but I do just think about that advice, or just the sense that don't invest, it's gambling, decades ago. And how many people, like my parents were like, yeah, maybe we probably better not, speculate or buy real estate or any of that, because the brethren wouldn't do it. Yet they didn't really know what the brethren were doing behind the scenes.
It's the wonder of tax-free compound interest.
That's it.
And a billion every year thrown on the fire.
There were 13 dummy companies. Now there's just one. All right. Next story.
Ooh. Was that yours, or you were reading somebody?
No. That was just me saying, like, if you try to imitate the S&P 500 and you do worse at it, and you're led by prophets, seers, and revelators, and worthy men working the investments who Temple recommends, who start every day with prayer.
Yes.
If you can't at least do as well as the S&P 500, you're probably still a dummy company. All right. Next story here. I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Awesome. Yeah, this just popped up today. This is breaking news. We've heard, of course, that the BYU Medical School is on the horizon, but they have finally now announced where this is going to be built. It's going to be on the BYU West campus. If you're familiar with this, it used to be Provo High School. And back in 2016, they purchased that land and they refurbished it for some BYU buildings. And now this is where the medical school is going to go. This picture is not the medical school. This is just me having fun with AI. I find that I have to say that really loudly because people misinterpret what I do. And of course, I put at the top the Russell M. Nelson School of Medicine, because I think I would bet money on that. I would take my money out of the stock market and bet it on that is what they're going to name it. I mean, can you think of anything else that they could call it, unless it's just BYU School of Medicine? But what do you guys think? Am I off? Am I on? I just feel it's going to be the Russell M. Nelson School of Medicine.
The fix is in.
The fix is in. I think so too. Yep. And the more interesting part I found in this article is they were talking about what the medical school is going to be. And this is a quote by the president of BYU, whose last name is Reese. I can't remember his first name. But anyway, it says BYU's future medical school will provide a high quality, spiritually based program that reinforces the mission of BYU and the church. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
That's a lot of ominous sounding nothing.
Yeah, a spiritually based medical program. So I started thinking, what does that mean exactly? And you can add to this that I came up with. I guess that they'll be covering topics like consecrated oil. They'll be talking about fasting and praying when someone is ill. You know, that's a tried and true method. How about putting a name on the temple rolls? That's also
good.
something that you do when somebody needs medical help or intervention. Also, of course, a priesthood blessing. You know, that happens over and over when somebody isn't feeling well. And then, of course, there's Elder Bednar. And I don't know if this will be one of the major tenets of the medical school. And that is, sure, there's the faith to be healed. But what about the faith not to be healed?
Faith
I'm just
not to be
wondering if they're
healed.
going to cover all of this.
Faith
Exactly.
faith not to be healed will be inscribed
Yeah.
outside the medical school. Sort
Yeah,
of
you're
like the
right.
glory of
Maybe
God is intelligence is outside BYU. By the way, that consecrated oil, don't dismiss that. That comes in handy when it's enema time.
Yeah. Oh, God. I think that's TMI, perhaps. But you could be right. Look at this building again. I can see Russell M. Nelson, School of Medicine, and underneath it, the faith not to be healed. I think we've
Boom.
done it. There it is. So anyway, this is on the horizon. It's coming. They're going to start taking applications, and it's going to be right there. You've got now a medical school and a law school. You have a business program. The only thing missing, and no one will ever have to leave Utah County and go out into the wild, wicked world, and that's the dental school. As soon as they add that, they can keep everything in-house.
The classes on human dissection will be held in the Faith Not to be Healed building.
That's right. And I do question that because I've talked before about BYU being in the art program and how they had to outsource some things like human figure drawing. You would go to a studio in Provo for that. You could not do that on campus and the upper division classes, you know, to draw the human form. So a lot of people are weighing in on this, saying there's a lot of care that might go against the mission of BYU and the church. And you can probably think of what some of those things would be, but I wonder how they'll navigate that.
Adroitly and prophetically as usual, I predict.
Absolutely. That's right. So anyway, that was some breaking news just about that, and we'll find out more later. I do have, just kind of attached to this, speaking of building things, a couple little temple updates, just really, really quick. I wanted to mention Lone Mountain. Now we know that that's already been passed, and the residents group had appealed, you know, the whole process, everything that had happened, that had been dismissed. And then the residents group is trying to take it to the Nevada Supreme Court, saying that should not have been dismissed. I don't know if they've gotten, you know, any headway on that as far as being able to appear in front of the Supreme Court like Cody, Wyoming did and is awaiting a decision from the Wyoming Supreme Court. But just in the last couple days, the city of Las Vegas is suing the residents group. This is the Rural Preservation Alliance, over the attorney fees. And I know I sent this document to RFM, so maybe you can just kind of explain what this means. But they're saying to the residents, hey, you brought this thing before the court, we dismissed it, and now you pay our fees. Is that kind of what's happening?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not, technically, they're not suing them for this. They have filed a motion in an ongoing lawsuit in which the city of Las Vegas has prevailed decisively. And what they're saying is that the people, the plaintiffs, the Nevada Rural Preservation Alliance and or their attorneys also included in this, should have known that this was a frivolous lawsuit, had no basis in law or in fact, and was therefore just harassing the city of Las Vegas in bringing it in the first place and pursuing it after they had noticed that it was of no value. And therefore, the city of Las Vegas is moving to have the Nevada Rural Preservation Alliance pay the city for the city's attorney's fees.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know that the Alliance is working on a response to that, and we'll see what happens. But again, it's just...
It was 50,000 plus, right? It was something like that.
55, something like that. But I just,
so
you know, in every single town where the church comes, even they win here, of course, they win everywhere, but there's an aftermath. There's collateral damage, you know, of citizens involved in lawsuits, cities involved in lawsuits, church and the city joining together. It's just, it's chaos, you know, in their wake every single time.
Oh, absolutely. And you had sent this to me a number of days ago, I guess it was, but I had read through this, and here's the argument. I mean, the city of Las Vegas has already won this. All right. So that's not an issue at this point in this court, which is the 8th Judicial District Court. It can still be appealed, right? But this is about attorney's fees. in the trial court level, which is what I believe this district court is in Clark County, Nevada. And there is a rule in the statute, which is cited here, which is that if a person is going to appeal or go to court to challenge a city's decision, then that person has to have appeared in front of the city council when the measure was being argued and decided. Do I have that right, Rebecca?
Yeah, exactly. They're saying they were not an entity, a formed entity during all the processes, all the meetings that we watched. And in my mind, having worked with this group long before the decision, they were an entity. But, you know, on paper, there may be some argument back and forth. So
there's no argument anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why the judge already decided for the city of Las Vegas on this basis, I believe, as I read the pleadings.
Right. And that's why they are petitioning now the Supreme Court of Nevada to say, let's revisit this. So anyway, we'll keep you updated. But again, just kind of somebody said in the comments, like a bad neighbor, the Mormons are there. And it does seem to be that way. A quick little update on Heber. Of course, Heber, again, is also, you know, supposedly a done deal, but there is a residence lawsuit and they've asked for a summary judgment, which you explained before. And they had asked that the date be moved up. It's June 2nd, and the judge is going to rule on whether or not there can be a summary judgment, which would kind of expedite things. But here's the empty lot. It's been that way for quite a while. So we'll see what happens, but it's still going. I think that's the point I want to make, is that things are still going with all these temples that we've been covering since the very beginning of the newscast. It's pretty interesting. All right. Next slide. Here we go. So the Syracuse, Utah temple had an open house, and I went. There I am standing outside, and the advertisement for the open house, it cropped the temple off and it just shows the steeple. I'm telling you, I am becoming a conspiracy theorist on this. They're only going to show the steeples going forward. But I just wanted to draw attention to this one because there is, much like a double rainbow, a double baptistry. And you can see the highlighted areas here. We were only allowed to tour one of them, but it certainly takes up a lot of room. It's not just the font, you know, it's the dressing room, the little chapel waiting area, the confirmation rooms, the lockers. It's a giant part of the temple. And of course, the main reason behind this, as we've discussed before, is youth are really the only ones that are regularly attending the temple, I think. And you can get those carloads of youth in there. You can do double duty, double baptistry. And I've talked about this before, how there are these rumors that now kids as young as 8 may be soon doing baptisms for the dead. We've talked about this. And here's a picture, of course, a bishop interviewing an 8-year-old, right? In order to go to the temple and do baptisms for the dead, you need something called a limited use recommend or a youth recommend, right? We've all heard that word. I never really thought about what that was until I started to look into it, right? So now we're talking about right now, kids as young as 11 have this experience with their bishop in getting a youth recommend. Possibly children as young as 8. We'll see if that rumor actually comes true.
Where did you get those pictures, Rebecca? You made those up, didn't you?
I did not make those up. Those are real pictures from the church. Nope, I did not. I did not. Nope. Those pictures are actually on the church website.
He really looks that goofy?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're trying to make him look harmless. Do you know what I mean? Just completely innocuous because he looks completely goofy. Yeah, I think that's it.
The opposite of harmless.
Exactly. But here's the thing I thought was interesting. So do you guys know the questions that are asked in a limited use recommend? This is for kids starting at age 11.
Something about child support.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, they are the same as the temple recommend questions, except for leaving out those more adult ones about, you know, having gone through the temple and still adhering to those covenants. So you're going to have an 11-year-old asked, do you live the law of chastity? Right? And you can find these questions in the For Strength of Youth. You're going to have an 11-year-old asked, do you support any group or person whose teachings oppose those accepted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Right? You know, what if the kid says, well, my mom has a podcast? Oops, I guess maybe you can't go do baptisms for the dead. Anyway, I was just really surprised. They asked about conduct being in harmony with family members. They asked, do you sustain the president of the church as the only person on the earth? You guys know the drill. I'm just trying to say that these are the very same questions that they ask in the regular adult temple recommend interview, but they're asking them to children as young as 11. I don't know. That just struck me as a little, I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for? What do you think?
It seems a little much for a kid.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's a little much for a kid. And then the other thing I thought that I found was really funny in this was like a
But
big
Rebecca,
handout. Yeah.
Rebecca, let's say you're 8 or 9 years old
Uh-huh.
and a goofy looking bishop, I mean,
Uh-huh.
goofy as F
Yeah.
looking bishop, bends over to you and asks you if you keep the law of
Uh-huh.
chastity. What, put yourself back when you were 9. I don't know what you knew about the law of chastity. I'm sure you at
Nothing.
least heard of it floating
No.
about. What would you say?
No, I can put myself back to when I was 13 and this happened to me and I didn't know anything. And my bishop said, I can tell by your face that you don't know what it means. So I'm going to tell you what it means
Yes.
so that you can answer it. And he did. He described in a lot of details things that, probably my parents should have been the one to tell me. And maybe this is why I'm kind of so triggered by this, because I had very difficult interviews being a really naive child. But here's a picture of a cute little 8-year-old boy and girl. I thought this was interesting. This is also from the handbook. It says, when a member of the bishopric or stake presidency or another assigned leader meets with a child, youth, or woman, he or she should ask a parent or other adult to be in the adjoining room, foyer, or hall. If the person being interviewed desires, another adult may be invited to be present during the interview. Leaders should avoid all circumstances that could be, and here's the word, misunderstood. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't say dangerous for a child or, that a child could be in harm's way. It's all talking about, even in this little paragraph, the protection of the leader. Something might be misunderstood in what you're doing. I just thought that was so telling right there. Yep. So anyway, that was my experience at the Syracuse temple. I will say I had a little testimony building incident that happened there. Before I went to the temple, my dog got out of my fence. And I was very upset because she's a dog that runs away. She'd been gone for hours before
Alice?
I knew that she was gone. No, Rosie, the other one.
Oh.
She's a rescue dog. She's very skittery. She's very scared. She doesn't know how to survive in the wild. And so she has a collar on that has a phone number, so I thought, but I was really worried. But I thought, you know what? I got to go to the Syracuse temple because I got to get some pictures for the newscast, right? So I go through the whole temple tour. I go into all the different rooms. I will bring this up after I finish this story. And as soon as I left the temple, I got the phone call that my dog had been found. So it didn't happen inside the temple. It happened outside.
You were blessed for going. Good for you.
Or I was blessed for leaving. That's kind of how I look at it.
So what happened inside the temple? Did it involve a ceiling room?
One last observation. Yeah, one last observation about that. So you guys have been on temple open houses before in the tours. And they have people reading cards. And they have easels set up with the descriptions of what happens in each room, right? You'll see the baptistry and it has the endowment, the ceiling. There was one room that did not have a person standing next to it going like this, and also didn't have any kind of signage letting anybody know what happened there. What room do you think that was?
The celestial bedroom.
No, well, okay, that really is a deep, dark secret. No, I'm talking about the initiatory room.
Oh,
the
really?
sign on the wall said initiatory, but underneath it, there was no, like every other room, an easel with a description, a nice
So they did have one for
description.
the second anointing room?
Yeah, well, that's way, way in the back. No, we were
At
not
the very
allowed to do that.
beginning of the whole process,
Yeah.
and at the very end, we're not saying anything about it.
Exactly. So I thought that was really funny. So I was feeling a little facetious. So I walked down the hall and I said very loudly, well, what happens here? I wonder, why isn't there any sign? Trying to pretend that I was, somebody who didn't know. So.
And what happened?
It's strange. Nothing happened. There was some security that was kind of a couple people behind me, but I can't say yes or no if that was for me or if it was just security that was there. But I think it's very interesting that part they're not going to be upfront about because it's kind of hard to explain.
Can I go back for just a second to this picture on the screen and what you had here?
Yeah, sure.
When you ask a child, do you live the law of chastity? To a child who most likely, as you said, doesn't even know what's being asked.
Yeah.
You're creating a situation where the bishop either chooses to because the kid is clueless, or the kid asks because the kid is clueless, and then the bishop explains. In other words, you're creating a situation where almost certainly sexual questions will be talked about and asked, even if your original intention is only to have this point blank simplified question thrown at the kid, the conversation will inevitably go much deeper because it's and again, in terms of baptism, it's a 7-year-old kid.
Yep.
In terms of, a 11 or 12-year-old going to the temple for baptism for the dead. But you're asking at a 7-year-old at baptism, do you live a law of chastity? That kid doesn't know what that is. And now you have a grown stranger man and a 7-year-old child in a room behind a closed door with no window.
Yeah.
And this guy is now responsible to explain to that little girl what the law of chastity is. And you're depending on that man every time in every ward building being a healthy, responsible, grown adult man rather than a weirdo. And we all know that a certain percentage of people are going to ask things they shouldn't and do things they shouldn't. And you're creating the very situation that gives the person in power who's unhealthy the ability to manipulate the conversation in the direction that they want. It's insane that Mormon leadership still has lay leader stranger men in rooms with children.
It is. The first
it's real.
caption.
It's absolutely real. I mean, it happened to me. I'm sure it happened to many people in the chat. It's real. It's not, as the quote said, a misunderstanding. It really happens.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This may be too Mormonism after dark, but the caption on the first one is, "Now, let me tell you about bestiality, little Emily." And the second caption is, "This is what we call the patriarchal grip. It's what we use when we get married."
That bestiality question, though, I've seen posts on social media where they say, I took my lovely bride who's 18, went for her interview to go through the temple, and they ask her about that. I mean, it's like, what are they doing?
She ran off with a dog.
I think why that question is there, because all the early leaders grew up on farms.
Okay, we probably better get past this slide.
We've got to get past it. Sorry, we're done. And I just had to say one last thing here with temples. Another quote I came across today from Elder Bednar. He always, he's on the side of all the towns that are, trying to help the church do better with zoning. It says, if we talk temple, we focus on the structure and we miss what matters most. A primary child should hear the word house of the Lord more than he or she hears temple. Why? This can help take the focus away from the building and put it on the Savior. So again, great quote. There it is.
And that was from 2023. So this got dug up. Oh, from a church news podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, the chickens are coming home to roost.
That's exactly it. Don't focus on the dang building. That's the point of view there. All right. Enough temple talk. On to the next.
All right. We talk temple.
RFM, you've got this one, I believe.
Ooh.
I do. Porn, that's as in pornography, would become crime under Republican proposal by Sierra Campbell. This is a 5/15/25 The Hill article. And we're talking about it because Utah is playing a prominent role in it through its Senator Mike Lee. He could make porn a crime in the United States. The Interstate Obscenity Definition Act, or the IODA, would add all pornography, including any depiction of sexual acts that lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, to the definition of obscenity. By the way, this article I found not exactly hugely well written, but I wanted to go to The Hill just to show that I'm widely read. This would make it illegal to distribute or consume porn regardless of the material's intent. Currently, only porn intended to abuse, threaten, or harass someone is illegal. Okay, I'm going to go on with this. I thought it was good enough to get some basics, okay? Try not to follow the argument because I think the argument is a mess here. And I'm going to see if I can clear it up. Maybe I'll make it worse. So there's a co-sponsor, Representative Mary Miller. She's a Republican from Illinois, who also had a hand in the new proposal, said it would equip law enforcement with the tools they need to target and remove obscene material from the internet, which is alarmingly destructive and far outside the bounds of protected speech under the Constitution. Okay, so here's the basic thing you need to know right now, is that pornography under the law is considered to be a vast and kind of amorphous to some degree body of material, all right? But if pornography gets to the point where it is no longer, first off, let me back up and say that pornography is, as a general rule, protected by the First Amendment protections of freedom of speech. Okay, so that's established. But the law also recognizes that pornography can get to a point where it is obscene. And obscene is legal word. That means that pornography has gotten beyond the point of being able to be protected by the Constitution. So she's saying, and remove obscene material. She's using that as a term of art, and I believe she's using that correctly there. So the proposed act would define obscenity, obscenity as content that, there's a 3-part test, appeals to an excessive amount of interest in nudity or sex, shows or describes real or fake sexual acts, lacks scientific, political, artistic, or literary value. Okay, now you can already see a lot of problems with this. One of the things that Mike Lee is trying to do is he's trying to remove the subjective component out of this. In other words, some laws are have an objective component to it. In other words, a reasonable person would have known that they shouldn't be driving the car in such a reckless manner, okay? That's an objective standard. We're taking this idea of a reasonable person who is objective, okay? And you wouldn't have known it either, right? So, and the person who was driving themselves didn't know it. You can add that in there. That's subjective because that's what the driver themselves knows as opposed to this hypothetical reasonable person, okay? So in the current definition, which I am going to get to, there is stuff that's subjective, but this is also subjective, and this is why it's difficult. Now, if you go to part 2, shows or describes real or fake sexual acts, you can describe that in such a way as to make it clear what you're talking about. And the law has done so when it comes to crimes, sex crimes involving molestation or sexual touching or sexual penetration. And all of that can be defined with a high degree of accuracy, almost scientific accuracy, that anybody looking at that would know exactly what it is that's being described, okay? The problem is the first thing and the last thing in this list, that obscenity is content that appeals to an excessive amount. You see, excessive has built-in subjectivity to it. Well, excessive to whom? Okay? Appeals to an excessive amount of interest in nudity or sex. And then you really step in it with the last thing, right? Which is lack scientific, political, artistic, or literary value. And who are you going to say that is? Is that the reasonable person? Okay. So there's a lot of subjective stuff in here. The act, which has always been the bane of trying to define obscenity. And this has been going on for many, many decades, back into, I think, at least the 50s, if not the 40s, where the Supreme Court's trying to define obscenity in such a way as to make it clear what is protected and what is not protected. And there are some things that are clear-cut, okay? Child pornography, not protected by the First Amendment. Okay? Snuff films, not protected by the First Amendment. There are things that go so far beyond that everybody agrees that I would hope that everybody agrees that these things are not protected by the First Amendment, okay? But when you come back toward, regular artwork with nude people, when you come back from there toward that, then it starts getting a lot fuzzier, and people will disagree a lot more, and it becomes much harder to describe with any kind of accuracy. So here's the bill. It's just a 3-page bill, and I believe it passed the Senate in the United States. So we'll see what happens to it from here. But it's really just trying to redefine obscenity. And this is, as I said, very difficult. It's proven very, very difficult. I don't know that this is going to be the silver bullet that Mike Lee, I think, hopes it will be. Where it says the term obscene or obscenity, when read in a matter of context that explicitly refers to or could apply to a picture, image, graphic image, file, film, videotape, or other visual depiction. Okay? So it's talking about pictures. It's talking about images. And over here, number 1, right? It takes as a whole, if taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. That's one of my favorites, by the way, excretion. Taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion. It may have been in law school that I first encountered the word prurient. I'm not sure. I may have gotten it from the King James New Testament. It might appear in there, but it's an unusual word. And you can probably guess what it is from context if you don't know. 2, depicts, describes, or represents an actual or simulated sexual act or sexual contact. So it can be either actual or simulated, normal or perverted sexual acts. Yeah, that's going to be fun to try and define that. Or lewd exhibition of the genitals. And what makes it lewd? With this objective, we'll throw objective in, with the objective intent to arouse, titillate, or gratify the sexual desires of a person. So I think objective, you'd have to throw a reasonable person standard in there. And then 3, taken as a whole, and it has to meet all of these things or not be disqualified by any of these things. Taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So there's your definition. It's just passed the Senate. I'm thinking it originated there. It sounds like it did from the article, which means it's got to go to the House. If they pass it, it's got to be signed. And lots of people can change things. I don't think I'm the only person seeing that this is, it's kind of a train wreck. But then again, the way it is currently isn't hugely helpful. Back in '64, in one of the cases that was dealing with trying to define pornography, Potter Stewart, Justice of the United States Supreme Court, famously said, "I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material." Pornography was actually hard porn that he was trying to define. "I'm not going to try and define it any further, but I know it when I see it. I know it when I see it." And so that's Potter Stewart. And it's really unfortunate because in later life, he was reminiscing about his career on the Supreme Court. I mean, all the decisions he handed down, all the wise things he said, and this dumbass thing is what he'll be remembered for. And he said, "It'll probably be inscribed on my tombstone." It's just, I know it when I see it. It's not a very, judicial kind of way to define something. I know it when I see it. But the reason it has survived, this quote, is because it demonstrates how difficult, if not impossible, it is to define obscenity in such a way that you can write it out. If you see it, you can't write it out. And if you can't write it out, it's not really going to be something that you can enforce. So Miller versus California, 1973. I'm not going to give you the whole history. This is the main law, which I believe is in play currently, even though it's about 50 years ago, 52 years ago, Miller versus California. It's another 3-part test. And by the way, when you see the 3-part test in Miller versus California, a lot of the language that's being proposed by Mike Lee and the senator from Illinois is going to sound very familiar. Miller versus California was a landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court clarifying the legal definition of obscenity as material that lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Remember that from number 3? It's taken from Miller versus California. Because even while he's trying to make the definition of obscenity narrower or more clear, or I guess broader, really, okay? He also knows that he has to have certain parts in there in order to try to not get it reversed on appeal as being in violation of Miller versus California, right? Which is interpreting the official interpretation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. All right, the ruling was the origin of the 3-part judicial test for determining obscene media content that can be banned by government authorities, which is now known as the Miller test. So that has 3 prongs to it too, or 3 elements, and here they are. The court, in an attempt to set such limits, devised a set of 3 criteria which must be met for a media item to be legitimately subjected to state regulatory bans. Now, the first part here is the part that's different. It's the part that is in the current Miller test that is not in the new proposed bill, the one that just passed the Senate with Mike Lee. All right. So I want to go to 2 and 3 first. 2 is whether the work depicts or describes in an offensive way sexual conduct or excretory. It's been there since '73. Functions as specifically defined by applicable state law, and whether the work taken is number 3, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. When you see this and you compare it with the bill, right? Then what you can see is that 3 is exactly the same. 1 is quite similar to what is 2 in the Miller test. And then the change. The main change is right there with number 1, which is in the Miller test, says whether the average person applying contemporary community standards. That's what is missing intentionally in the new bill. Applying contemporary community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. Well, they kept the prurient interest. We saw that. But they're taking out the contemporary community standards. And, I don't know if that's necessary to its being constitutional. I know that when I read this, I kind of thought that's interesting, because what you're doing is, when I say when I read this, I mean when I took con law back in my first year in law school, starting back in 1986 at the University of Texas at Austin School of Law. When I read this, I thought that was just kind of odd, but they're the Supreme Court, they're the smart people, right? But if you're going to tie the level of obscenity that's permitted to contemporary community interests, and contemporary community interest tends to continue to push the envelope of what is accepted, then aren't you setting up a system that is almost certainly going to ratchet itself downward to the point where anything goes? And I don't know if Mike Lee sees it the same way, but he sees this as a problem, and that's why he's taking it out, and he's going to see if that will fly. So I think this is, let me see, is there anything else? Oh yeah, sorry. The Miller ruling, and particularly the resulting Miller test, that's the 3-part test, was the Supreme Court's first comprehensive explication of obscene material that does not qualify for First Amendment protection, and thus can be banned by governmental authorities with criminal charges for those who distribute it. Furthermore, due to the 3-part test's stringent requirements, very few types of content can now be completely banned. And material that is appropriate for consenting adults can only be partially restricted per delivery method. So I think it's pretty clear that what the new bill wants to do is make possession of, well, that's actually the transport of obscene pornography broader by taking out that intent thing they were talking about. You don't have to have an intent. You just have to broadcast it. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling on this because it's across state lines, right? That's when the federal government is supposed to be able to get involved. When something goes across state lines, otherwise it's a matter for the states to enforce. But in today, I mean, this podcast, right? I mean, how many state lines are we going across? All of them. So it's increasingly difficult to do anything today, podcasting, pornography-wise, whatever it might be, that doesn't automatically cross state lines and therefore come under the heading of this bill. So I think that is it. Let me see. Wow, there's another one. It just keeps going on and on. Potential issues with banning pornography. Thomas C. Arthur, here's Thomas, with Emory University School of Law, wrote about the potential problem that could arise from banning obscene material in the Emory Law Journal. In his paper, he wrote, first, obscene pornography is difficult, if not impossible, to define. Okay, it's not just me saying this, okay? Under basic First Amendment principles. The current definition does not come close, and that's the Miller test, I believe he'd be talking about there. The current definition does not come close to reaching the materials that allegedly corrupt the moral tone of society, the health of relationships and family life, and the status of women. So I'm not sure if he's approaching this from one side or another. He sounds like he's just calling it as he sees it. But he's saying right now, the current definition doesn't come close to taking these things off the market from those people who are alleging these kind of things going on. But Arthur, same guy, also believes that banning porn could lead to freedom of expression being restricted overall. And there's Mike Lee. Lee says obscenity isn't protected under the First Amendment. That's true. It's not. The question is, how can you define it? And will the Supreme Court uphold your definition as not intruding into the First Amendment protections? And adds that some legal definitions have put extreme pornography within the reach of children. Our bill updates the legal definition of obscenity for the internet age so this content can be taken down. And then I just put up this slide because I was thinking that, there is sort of a pornography continuum. There are things that pretty much everybody would agree is obscene and should not be protected. And we talked about those before, the child pornography, the snuff films. But over here on the left, I've got a picture of the statue, the David, which is a naked statue. And there are some people who would think that that was pornographic. So I would put these at different ends of the spectrum and suggest that the vast majority of people probably fall somewhere in between these two. And the question is now, as it has always been, whether it is within the power of the human language to be able to describe pornography anywhere in between these two in such a way that it can be enforceable without simultaneously violating the protections of the First Amendment. Back to you, Bill.
What do you guys think about? I mean, obviously, Arfim, you've shared your thoughts there. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on
Topic?
Utah lawmaker trying to make it so that, it's a Mormon line drawn for the rest of the world?
Yeah, and we've reported on similar things as far as Mormon lawmakers trying to push their agenda and backed kind of by the church into the public realm. The picture of the statue of David reminded me when I was at BYU in the 90s, they had a Rodin exhibit, The Thinker. You're probably familiar with that famous statue. Banned. Did not have that, and any other ones that were the naked form. That seems to be kind of the definition. If it's naked, it's out. But I feel obscenity is really in the eye of the beholder. I once came across a social media thread where people were talking about hot Eve with the dark hair in the temple film, right?
Oh, yeah.
They went on, and we were aroused. We were in the temple, hot Eve, dark hair. It really is in the eye of the beholder. And somebody in the chat was mentioning that does this include romance novels and books like this? And they were trying to guess if it would or wouldn't, because Mormon ladies really like to read their romance novels. When I was active, passed around my ward, 50 Shades of Grey. Everybody was reading it.
Really?
Yes, everybody was reading it and kind of passing it under the table
Did you
to
read
each
that?
other. Oh, no, I didn't need to. I mean, maybe the first or second one. Yeah.
Did you like it? Was it any good? I didn't read
The
those.
first one was, it's Twilight fan fiction. The first one was good and interesting, but then it kind of jumped the shark. But it was written as Twilight fan fiction, which is interesting.
Vampires?
Not vampires. No, not vampires. But yeah, we'll have to talk after. But anyway, the other thing I was going to bring up that Mormon ladies seem to really like are shows like Outlander, right? Those very steamy, romantic, which could be considered under Mike Lee's definition, pornography, because they definitely have sex scenes. I mean, of course, they have a lot of story and sweeping visuals and, period pieces. But I know people that are extremely faithful that I'm stunned to find out would watch Outlander or some of the other period pieces. So I don't know. You have to think about how far is this going to go? And
well, that's the redeeming literary and social value that offsets it in the third part of the test, right?
Okay,
So,
maybe.
And this is why, I mean, my gosh, I don't need to take you through the whole history of pornography as it's worked its way through the legal system, and I'm not qualified to, certainly not at this point. But this is why it was that, I don't know, was it the 70s or the 80s? You're going to have to tell me. They had entire movies about pornography, okay? In other words, there is a story like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which I snuck into at an age that I shouldn't have been sneaking into, okay? And it wasn't as great as I hoped. But there is this dumb story that is linking up the sex scenes, which is why everybody's there, okay? But you have a story so that you can say that it has redeeming literary value.
Correct.
I mean, that was the whole point.
Right. But the story, I think, really makes it appeal to women more than men, so you get all audiences from that. The story is key, I think.
So you've seen Outlander as well?
Oh, yeah, I've watched of course, I watch everything. I have to, because I maybe ask my opinion on a podcast about it. I have to be aware of every single thing. So
I've watched a little Outlander too. It's a great TV show. So
I haven't. Was Sean Connery in this at one time ages ago?
Yeah. He was Highlander, wasn't he?
Highlander.
Highlander.
I actually was confused there.
Highlander, Outlander. It's all the same. A big beefy guy in a skirt. Of course it is.
There you go. Well, we'll move on to the next story then. So that we got that one. This is in the Salt Lake Tribune as well. This is a special report. As Latter-day Saint Church grows bigger in this country, so do challenges. young members, high poverty, even modern polygamy. And that was, I don't want to spend time talking about the other issues here. I just wanted to zero in on the polygamy issue and just note something. So I will say this, and you noted this, Rebecca, I think it was you, it was either you or RFM, but you noted the beautiful optics here. I call it bad optics, but here's the temple, and temples are often built in the best areas of a city. If you look here in Africa, you've got the temple there behind what looks like quite an area of poverty. And
I thought that was the new Fairview Temple.
Well, the steeple certainly stands high enough, doesn't it? But it does look like bad optics. I mean, you've got areas where there's a lot of poverty, people barely getting by, and here's this atrocious building that just sits in the middle of a town that draws your eyes to it because that steeple is so dang tall. Any thoughts on this before I move to the main part of the story I wanted to
So this is in Africa. Do you know which temple this is?
This is the new Nairobi temple. Elder
Nairobi.
Torres just dedicated it, and it had an open house the week before. I reported on this. If you remember, some Christian articles had come out warning people about the LDS Church because there was a lot in the media about the temple. But, some people have pointed out, yes, if you look, this is shot from a certain angle. If you kind of go the other direction, there are some more normal looking buildings and things like that. But there have been other pictures as it was being built that definitely shows some infrastructure like this. So, I think I posted this and I said something like a picture is worth 1,000 words. I got a lot of pushback on that, but I still stand by this. It kind of says it right there. But yes, this is the Nairobi newly dedicated temple.
All right. So there's that. I just want to note here from the article, 9.2% of Kenyans are married in polygamous relationships. Because I want to talk about polygamy for a moment and how the church handles it in an area where the potential converts, the investigators who are taking the missionary discussions, they are, many of them, again, almost 10% of them are practicing polygamy. 9.2% of Kenyans are married in polygamous relationships. 85% of Kenyans are Christian. So a lot of people think that this is just an Islamic issue, that the followers of Islam in Africa are polygamous, which is true, but it's actually among the Christians as well. It far permeates beyond the Islamic faith in Africa. According to a report by Religion News Service, despite teachings from the Catholic Church and other Christian denominations, a large number of Christian men in this East African country, possibly in the hundreds of thousands, are practicing polygamy. The LDS Church permitted plural marriage from 1830s until the early 1900s, at least according to the most accepted historical narrative. But today it excommunicates those who practice it and bars them from baptism. In Kenya, and here's the important thing, in Kenya, this policy means that individuals in polygamous marriages must dissolve all but one union before they can be baptized into the faith. And when you think about that, I'll just note our hymn out of the hymn book, number 300. Families can be together forever. And all of us could sing it. Families can be together forever
through Heavenly Father's plan.
Yep. I always want to be with. Yep. So I'll just note, in a church that has branded families are together forever beyond any other religion out there, there's a deep contradiction in a faith that proclaims such, that families are forever, while simultaneously requiring a man to abandon some of his wives and their children to join its ranks. This policy not only undermines the very families it claims to eternalize, but also forces converts. And again, force is a strong word, but it says you cannot join the church unless you do this, but the missionaries are still willing to teach those people. And they're still willing to tell them, hey, here, have an experience where you think you felt the Holy Ghost and you think you know now that our church is true. And then, oh, by the way, now that we've got you hooked, in order to get baptized, you're going to need to leave your wives and children. Particularly in cultures where polygamy is common, into painful moral dilemmas, the message becomes clear. Family unity is sacred, but only when it conforms to the institution's narrow definition. For a religion built on rhetoric of eternal bonds, asking someone to fracture their actual lived family relationship to gain spiritual acceptance reveals a troubling hierarchy of doctrine over human connection. And I'll just note, also knowing that in the past that celestial marriage or polygamy was commanded and it was essential to salvation in the highest kingdom. It's also ironic that a church would then go to polygamous folks in another country, try to teach them the gospel, and then when they believe, ask them to abandon their wives and kids. I noted that in the article. The other things are certainly issues that the church is dealing with in these countries too. My 2 cents, I'll just turn it over to you guys to get your thoughts, but my 2 cents is that the church should just have a hard and fast rule, because it already does it here. It won't even, in most instances, you got to get special approval to teach a polygamous family here in like Southern Utah, for instance. And, McKelty from Cody Brown's family, the sister wives, wanted to join the LDS Church, and they sought special approval from Salt Lake, and they denied her. I think they did the same thing with the other sister as well that wanted to join. And we have these instances in the church where the church just stays away from things. And I just think it's atrocious that you would teach anyone the gospel and invite them to have an experience with the Holy Ghost, which is elevation emotion. So you trick people into a definition of what truth is. And then when someone wants to join the church, you even leave room that you ask them to get rid of their wives and children, to disconnect from them in order to join the one and true church upon the earth. Your guys' thoughts on that?
I was going to say, I think it's getting to the point where a missionary, when they knock on a door, a lot of times the people who answered the door, they can't even teach. Same-sex couple, oh, sorry. A man with 3 of his wives, oh, never mind, I'll come back later. You know what I mean? The definition, what the missionary is selling, does not match what's happening on the world stage. And I think it was the Philippines, where there are situations, no divorce, and also very difficult to get married because of bride price and different things like that. And I saw recently that the church had been involved politically in trying to make it easier for couples to be married. And I'm sure it has to do with this. They're trying to create, because at this point, people are all just kind of living together in lots of scenarios because it's too difficult to get married, or perhaps you're married before, you can't divorce, you just, start living with someone else. And they're just trying to create this family that's, mom, dad, kids. And yet here they are with these polygamous families, everyone consenting, it's cultural, as somebody pointed out in the comments, and you have to choose your one wife. And that means there are other women that are put aside, much like Brigham Young used to do to his wives, right? And the children, everybody's disenfranchised. You're never in a better scenario when you don't have, this family bond when you're married. And it reminds me, even when I was an active member, a family member told a missionary story from their mission about there was a couple that they were teaching, and they had just been living together for 40 years. There was some reason that the man could not marry. It was possible. It was another country. He was married to someone else. Anyway, they were not married, but they had been living together for 40 years. And the missionary told the story that, you can't be baptized unless and he was teaching the wife only. And he said, you can't be baptized unless, you're married. And she said, well, I can't be married, whatever the circumstance was. And so they convinced her to leave her husband of 40 years so she could join the church. And this was a faith promoting story that was told by this family member. And even when I was faithful, I was like, that just doesn't sound right. Why are you destroying these lives? They can work it out later in the next life, but this was an amazing faith promoting story.
No, you got this wrong, Rebecca, because it's the anti-Mormons. It's the critics that are out there destroying families.
Oh, you're right. Yep, that's it. So yeah, I think they're going to butt up against this on the global stage over and over. And it's only going to get more interesting. And they're going to try what they, like trying to make it easier to get married, trying to make people make these decisions, but it just doesn't fly.
And this has also been going on for a surprisingly long period of time. We're actually going to touch on something that happened over 60 years ago in a subsequent story of mine. But I've got to tell you, Bill, you did a great job of outlining the painful irony of this entire thing vis-a-vis the Mormon Church. And it occurs to me once again that polygamy is the monkey on the Mormon Church's back.
Yeah, well, we are cruising along, so we ought to probably get into our cruise story. Rebecca,
The segue. I love
Did you see
it.
I
That was
added a
awesome.
slide?
What?
Did you see I added this slide?
Oh, no, I didn't. Oh,
Yeah, I
you
did it.
okay? Add it like 4 down. That's when I get into the LDS offerings. Aside from this other one, yeah, go past that. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Okay. So, so I can't believe that BYU hasn't already done this. Like, I would think this would be something that they'd be doing all the time, but apparently they have never had a BYU cruise. Cruising with the Cougs sails into BYU history. And for those of you that wanted to participate, you just missed it. Dang it. It was just about 3 weeks ago, but they are going to do it again. And this is sponsored by the athletic department. So that's why you can see Cosmo, of course, was one of the people that were. It's a huge star-studded cruise, and the history of it, it's been in the works for like decades. They've been trying to plan it, trying to figure it out. It says BYU's inaugural Cruising with the Cougs was April 11th to 18th, fully booked, sold out almost right away. It was organized by Troy Dunn. It featured BYU alumni, including Coach Kalani Sitake. So, you know, big name draw. And then all the other celebrities got on board, so to speak. The cruise offered BYU themed activities, sports camps, and a welcoming environment for fans. So that was the point. This is a wholesome, family-friendly cruise where you can live BYU standards, relive your heyday. Everything is in blue and white, and you can, you know, hang out with all the other people that are BYU alumni.
Where are they cruising?
It just was like left from, I think, California, and just kind of, yeah, it wasn't anywhere super exotic.
Like it's not even important to the story.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I didn't even pay attention. So it says, if you are BYU fan from outside the Utah bubble, you don't get a lot of exposure to BYU. I mean, unless you go to church and you hear it talked about all the time. BYU sports is something you see on TV, not something you get to experience at a tailgate party. So the whole idea is to just kind of bottle up BYU and have everybody be able to experience it. So the one thing I thought was really interesting, I won't read through the whole article. Let me see if I can find it exactly. They talked about how they, the bars, you know, typically on a ship, you have entertainment, you have bars. They replaced all the entertainment on the regular cruise with BYU entertainment, the kind of celebrities that people who went to BYU would appreciate. And it says, I'm trying to find this exact quote, the bars on board were also transformed into, let me see if you can guess without reading, dirty soda bars. Of course they were, right?
What's a dirty soda?
It's not what you think it is, RFM. Have you heard of swig? I'm sure you have.
Yes.
Instead of drinking caffeine, yeah, that's a dirty soda.
From
You
you.
take a regular soda base and then you dirty it up with all kinds of ingredients like coconut cream or lime or raspberry. Anyway, it's called a dirty
That's so
soda.
edgy.
It's really edgy. Yes, absolutely. So they changed all the bars into dirty soda bars. They served classic sodas that the BYU fans had come to love, super sugary root beers and orange crush, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I went to BYU when you couldn't have a Coke on campus, not one bit. It's crazy. Many on board described the behind the scenes look at BYU as the ultimate fan experience, and they're doing it again in 2027. So a good time was had by all. But that just, and here's a list of the star-studded.
It sounds horrible to me.
It
sounds like the floating definition of hell.
Really
I see that they have a good sense to push the cougarettes, though. They're leaning heavy on the sexy.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say that all the pictures, and I didn't put all of them in the slideshow, they were all the cougarettes in their poses, and they were Cosmo and all kinds of sports celebrities that I don't know who a lot of these guys are because I don't follow BYU. But anyway, very exciting. But this is not the first of its kind, as you pointed out, RFM, with that one that you found. I just did just a very rudimentary search. There are so many of these, and they all feature celebrities, lots of people that we know here in the post-Mormon world. This one is called Wave Makers. I think there's still time for anybody to book a passage on this. See, the Stick of Joseph brothers are there.
You could actually pay money to get stuck on the same boat with Jacob Hansen.
That's exactly right. So I'm saying Jacob
Hansen.
Hansen.
True.
Exactly. That's it. There's Greg from Quick Media, but these guys go on a lot of cruises. I mean, there are a lot of perks in the faithful LDS world. You get to go on these cruises.
What's going on here? I haven't been invited to go on a cruise.
This is the point I'm trying to make. Where is our cruise?
Hello.
Do you know who's on a cruise right now? Is our amazing friend Randy Bell. And
Martin, but it's not his cruise.
No, they are cruising with Bart Ehrman in Greece. Can you imagine that?
Cruise. It's not a Randy Bell cruise.
Exactly. No, I'm just saying that our friends, there are cruises that are, I think, worth going on, and being able to rub elbows with Bart Ehrman would be incredible. Here's another one. They're going to Italy, right? And you have some notables there. Let me see. This is a big one. Look at everybody here. Again, a couple of the same people on cruise after cruise.
Next January.
Yep, next January. But you see the same faces pop up over and
David
over.
Osmond, because all the good Osmonds were busy.
Yeah. No, he was my neighbor. I know him. He's
Vinny Oak Baker.
Yep.
Which is the not nepotism.
No, exactly. But I'm just saying this is what these podcasters, they're living at a next level. I don't know how
Jaden Schaefer's up there. Look.
Yep.
No.
No, it's not.
He is. He's right in the corner.
Anyway,
and then if it's not a celebrity, it's like a theme cruise, the 5 Temples tour. They're going to go all around, right? They're going to cruise. On other cruises, you jump off and you go sightseeing, you go to the beach. Here you jump off and you go do an endowment ceremony at a temple.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I will say, because I told you how I have these little missionaries on my social media. And I knew this cruise existed, but when I posted about cruises, they're like, well, there was a Mormon Stories cruise. Yeah. Yes,
and
there
John
was.
Larson was on it too, I think. This is kind of a big deal.
Yep, years ago there was. It was back in 2018, and it was more like kind of book your own ticket, and then if you want to do this, it's these other cruises are pretty spendy. They really are. But you know what? You get to hang out with the people that you care about. So anyway, cruises, and that's what I say. Maybe we should come up with some kind of something. I think that'd be really fun. We'll have to see. Anyway, any final thoughts on BYU cruises and faithful LDS cruises? I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, no pun intended. But there are a lot of
nobody's invited me to go on a cruise.
Yeah, this is big money.
And I didn't, but not me. This is not doing good things for my ego.
I didn't even get into the bus tours. You know how many bus tours there are that you can take all around? I mean, this is a huge, lucrative industry. Yeah, it's gigantic.
Like the night bus.
Yeah, like the night bus. I don't know what we're doing wrong.
Is the next one mine?
No. Yes.
We should do a cruise. Why don't we get all of the post-Mormon content creators together?
That's my story.
And let's create a cruise where we all go have a good time with the folks who follow our work. That would be a great time.
That's what I say. Wouldn't that be fun? Everybody just book on the same cruise. I know. I think it'd be really fun.
Kerry loves this one because he's really thrilled that they start with a destination and then they work in the entire path to get there based on needing to get to that destination.
That's very funny. Kerry Muhlstein, last there. He's going to be the chaperone. He's going to make sure that nobody has a good time.
But I'm guessing, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm guessing all of these guys are comped, right? Because they're kind of the talent and the draw to be on the cruise. So I'm guessing they don't buy their own ticket. I'm guessing
Greg Manson gets to bring along his own microphone and talk into it like, hello, my name is Greg Manson.
Yeah. And again, they do give, I think, they give seminars and things, they have presentations and things along the way, I think. So.
Well,
I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on.
He's like a wonderful guy, but that voice does sound a little bit affected. Just saying.
A little bit.
I was doing a play on Quick Media, or is it CWIC? And I think he pronounces it Quick.
Yeah. I don't even know what it stands for. Do you know what it stands for?
No
Who
idea.
cares?
Quick. Tad Walsh, Deseret News, May 15th, 2025. A lot of these articles are coming from May 15th, which we all know is Priesthood Restoration Day. I hope you celebrated accordingly. Filler versus Action Engine. It came to pass carries more weight than you think. This is the stupidest article I have ever read by Tad Walsh or anybody else in the Deseret News or any other rag, where it tries to argue that it came to pass is actually evidence that the Book of Mormon is true rather than a ripoff of the Bible, which, by the way, uses "it came to pass" an awful lot as well. Elder Quentin L. Cook recently spotlighted the Book of Mormon's used phrase. Quentin L. Cook is pictured on the left. Like most believers, most Latter-day Saints learn early and often how to take a joke about their faith. See, we're just like other Christians. After all, Mark Twain made fun of the Book of Mormon in 1891, writing that if someone removed the phrase "it came to pass" from that book of scripture, it would have been only a pamphlet. Nobody tells a joke like that. When Elder Quentin L. Cook was a young college student, a university professor that he enjoyed quoted that bit of Twain in class with great glee. Elder Cook said recently at BYU Women's Conference, where he's addressing the women, apparently. In the footnotes of his talk, Elder Cook made some notable observations about Twain's words and how they are used against the Book of Mormon and believers. I think this is an early picture of Quentin. Each new generation is presented with Twain's comments as if it is a new significant discovery, he wrote, to which I thought, how could it be a new significant discovery if Twain's been dead for over 100 years? Just asking for a friend. He goes on, there is usually little reference to the fact that Mark Twain was equally dismissive of Christianity and religion in general. He hated all Christians, not just Mormons. When this kind of remark is done with humor, it is probably best to join in the amusement. Yeah, it probably is. Elder Cook's story didn't end in his college class. This is where it gets faith promoting, so listen up. Months later, he was serving a mission in London, England. By the way, this is when he's there when Elder Oaks is in London, England, and this is like in the height of the baseball baptisms that were going on over there. That don't get mentioned a lot. And especially the fact these guys were in the thick of it. Okay, in London, England, when he met an Oxford-educated teacher at London University who took a position opposite to Twain's. In other words, he argued against Twain. Now, this is supposed to give us, the ability to believe this guy, right? Already we've said he's an Oxford-educated teacher at London University, so he must be smart, and so he disagrees with Twain. Dr. Ebaid Seraphim was a native Egyptian. I had not heard this story before. Apparently, there's some truth to it. Dr. Ebaid Seraphim was a native Egyptian and expert in Semitic languages. This is the Deseret News story, who discovered the Book of Mormon by accident and sent a letter to President David O. McKay asking for baptism. When Seraphim met with missionaries, he told them that "it came to pass" was part of his intellectual belief in the Book of Mormon, because it mirrored the way he translated phrases commonly used in ancient Semitic writings, Elder Cook said. Well, yeah, so did the King James translators of the Bible that Joseph Smith had in his possession, the family Bible. They use it, I think, 727 times in the Old Testament, translating it as "it came to pass." But it's suddenly extremely important that this guy thinks that it's evidence because he translates it the same way the King James translators did. This is hard to believe that somebody who is at all educated would be coming up with these simpering conclusions. Sidebar on Dr. Ebaid Seraphim. This is not from the article. One story we get from Cook is about Dr. Ebaid Seraphim, that's Elder Cook, not a baseball baptism statistic. So this is an article called Cook/Holland Companionship and a Broken System. It is about the baseball baptisms in England, and that these two were there as missionaries at the time. That's why it's in the context and mentions the baseball baptism statistic, but it goes on to mention he was not one of Cook's own investigators, but he tells the story of Seraphim's baptism tied to the Book of Mormon. This article was written in 2023, 2 years ago, by the way. So this is something that Elder Cook brings up every now and again and dusts off and trots out for his own purposes. What is not shared is that Dr. Ebaid Seraphim was engaged in polygamous marriage when he was baptized and living with one of his polygamous wives in London. That would be the one from Switzerland, I think. This was 70 years after the 1890 manifesto. He apparently received special permission to violate the manifesto. Dr. Seraphim was even a noted guest at the April 1962 General Conference. We can only assume that Cook and Holland baptized many of the young men who were soon to be excommunicated. See, that's where it gets back to its main theme, this article. Holland and Cook, 2 future apostles, based on the promises of obedience, worthiness, and hard work, must have baptized thousands by getting them to join, their baseball team. You just have to get baptized in order to be a member. Okay. So having learned that about this individual who apparently he did apply, he did write a letter to President McKay asking for baptism. There was a link later on in this article which led to, anyway, I ended up finding a link that had the journals of President McKay during this time period. And yeah, he's writing about this a lot because this is a problem. And he wants to be able to get this guy baptized, but he can't come here to be baptized. And it sounds like it was very important. If both of his wives had been married to him in Egypt, that would have been something that would have been better from Elder McKay's point of view, I think, because it was pursuant to the law in Egypt. But it looks like, well, one of his wives was Egyptian, I think the first. The second was Swiss. And I believe it looks like initially Dr. Seraphim was saying that he had married them both in Egypt in order to grease the skids on the baptism, when actually it looks like he had married the Swiss one in England. And which is where he lived, right? And where he was taught by the missionaries. So one of the first things that he had to do, according to this, and according to David O. McKay, was, tell his first wife that he had married a second wife, because I guess she was in the dark. And he had said he had, although it looked like maybe he didn't actually later on. Anyway, I don't even know if he got baptized. But this is the story behind Ebiad Seraphim, who thought it was so dang important, at least according to Elder Cook's retelling, right, that it came to pass appears numerous times in the Book of Mormon. Now, continuing with the Deseret News story, the missionaries told him, Seraphim, it was essential to have a spiritual testimony too, Elder Cook said. The professor gained a spiritual witness and was baptized. So what one famous humorist, Mark Twain, saw as an object of ridicule, a scholar of Semitic languages, recognized as profound evidence of the truth of the Book of Mormon, which was confirmed to him by the Spirit, Elder Cook said at Women's Conference. This is pathetic. This is lame. I'm not believing this for a second. Why would you take something that makes it look like the Book of Mormon was patterned after the language of the Bible, and then say, well, this proves it's true because it uses the same language as ancient Semitic scripture like the Bible? And by the way, the crazy thing is this is from the same article. The title here is mine, but isn't it came to pass in the Bible? But the article in the Deseret News goes on to completely show why it is that everybody's wondering why they're making this argument in the first place. King James translators face the same redundant phrase, which in Hebrew is, it shows up about 1,200 times in the Hebrew Bible, which contains most of the Old Testament. The same expression is translated, and it came to pass in 727 Old Testament instances. This expression also occurs in the New Testament, such as in Luke 2, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Yeah. So obviously, because it shows up in the Book of Mormon so much, it shows the Book of Mormon has an ancient Semitic background. That's so simple. Any fool can see that. So why was this Hebrew phrase so popular in Semitic writings in that age? Because it was an engine of narrative storytelling. In its day, the same way quick visual cuts drive action movies today. Who would come up with an idea like that? Well, BYU professor Taylor Halverson has noted. And I noticed his last name, Bill. Taylor Halverson. You think he's related?
Seems like he could be at worst maybe a distant relative of Jared Halverson.
They look identical. They're twins.
Same smile.
Jared and Taylor. Absolutely. In fact, Halverson says the phrase contains a deeper spiritual driver as a representation of Jesus Christ. So get this, okay? It's not just something that says, okay, now, and this happened, right? No, it's got to be so much more profound. It came to pass, he says, is built on the same root word for God, Yahweh, the source of all things and the one who drives forward the narrative of each life. Boy, he's going to stretch it long and hard here. When we read it came to pass, Halverson writes, we see God's presence. his love, his concern, his energy, his knowledge, his direction, his guidance. Or maybe we just see an obvious attempt to make the Book of Mormon language sound biblical. See, that wasn't in the article, so I showed that was my addition. RFM. This is the biggest bunch of nothing I've ever seen. This is the biggest attempt to try and make something bad sound like something good. Oh, look. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, isn't it? Elder Cook's underlying message for both of his anecdotes also pointed to deeper personal action. This, again, is from the article. Dr. Seraphim's, this is Elder Cook saying, Dr. Seraphim's true account is interesting, but I would suggest the best approach for gaining a testimony is to immerse ourselves in the Book of Mormon so we can repeatedly experience the ongoing witness of the Spirit. And that's that story. Any comments from anybody?
I think that it came to pass is the very same thing as saying, as he's dictating, you gather your thoughts. Exactly. And also just to give it a little more importance, right? It sounds like somebody who's trying to make up an important highbrow language would use that, a biblical language. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought that
very
was
much so.
Super silly, but good coverage.
Thank you.
I think anything can be an evidence of the church if you want it to be.
Including a little white salamander masquerading as an angel sent from the courts of glory.
Yeah, it can be anything. And it came to pass is also a Bible phrase, a late war phrase. Do the same rules apply to it in other places, such as the late war or what is it? The first book of Napoleon. I think it also shows up in a bit. But the late war specifically, it's over and over and over again. Yeah.
Well, that means the late war must be ancient Semitic.
Yeah, it has to be. It's the only possible answer.
Consistency is a cruel mistress.
Yeah. Well, I think we have one more story, if I'm not mistaken.
We do, but I was going to make one more point about it came to pass. We did a podcast with a gentleman on Reddit who had created and I won't say the S word, but it's the I-S-H-I-T, you not. You replace it came to pass with I, you not. And when you read it like that, it is pretty funny reading. So, and that's
I'll bet Professor Taylor Halverson could find some deep symbolism for Jesus in that too.
I'm sure so. There's always got to be something. So I just wanted to make a quick mention because we certainly couldn't do this episode on the Monday after the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives has aired. Everybody is binge watching it like crazy. You can't even Google the word Mormon without having something about this come up, an article about every single one of the women or their husbands or their dog or their children. It's incredible. The Washington Post came out with an article that said the Mormon wives' secret lives are becoming kind of a bummer. And this is interesting this season. They do delve into a lot more what it's like to just live as a Mormon. Patriarchy rears its ugly head. And it's funny because I watch it, I'm like, yeah, that's totally normal. And then I'll read an article, how can those men treat them like that? So I realize that being raised in the patriarchy, I don't see it in the same way that other people see it as far as a marriage, and the control that a husband might have over a wife. So, but it is really interesting. And I would encourage anybody just to, watch it if you feel like you want to know what's going on. One surprise in episode 3, do you recognize? Okay, so there's me with my tea starting to binge watch, but on the right there, do you recognize who that person is?
Yes.
Yes, Natasha. That is our lovely Natasha Helfer. So one of the characters there, real people on the left went to therapy. And when she walked in and sat on the couch, there's Natasha, just, talking her through stuff. So I thought that was great. That Natasha
I want to applaud again, just as I did when Bill Reel brought this to my attention last Friday night on Mormonism After Dark, where all the good stuff happens first, folks.
Yeah. Oh, fine. I knew about it by Friday, but I don't have a podcast on Friday. So
Mormonish breaks the story on almost everything, RFM.
Yeah, but not Natasha.
But nobody sees it. Yeah, nobody sees it. You should start saying as seen on Mormonish. No one sees it, gosh darn it. But thank you for acknowledging that. Yes, exactly.
Maybe there's some crazy guy, maybe Jaden. Maybe Jaden's making a Mormonish podcast over there.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go look. That would be crazy. But anyway, really exciting. If you don't watch all of it, go about halfway through on episode 3. You can see Natasha. She's just shining, just doing her thing and giving excellent advice. And it was really fun because I didn't know she was going to be in it. It was really fun to see her pop up. So anyway, there it is. Secret Lives, Mormon Wives. All the episodes dropped on Thursday. Watch if you dare. One final slide. I just could not let this go. I do not
Is
subscribe.
this your TV?
Yeah.
Do you always have a copy of the Nauvoo Expositor on your TV table?
Damn it. I was going to crop that because I knew you'd catch that. Of course I have a copy of the Nauvoo Expositor. Who doesn't? I was doing some research. And it's funny because I thought, okay, should I crop this picture? I don't have time. No one will notice that.
You must think it's important.
Of course, RFM is going to notice that. He's going to look at every tiny little detail. I'm glad it was just the Nauvoo Expositor. Good heavens. Anyway,
What's this research you're doing?
Oh, I don't know. Speaking of magazines and periodicals, the Leah Hona, right? This magazine that you can get for free to come into your home, right? Replaces the old ensign. Okay, so I don't get it. I look at the online version, but somebody posted a picture from the actual magazine that they had, and I tried to find the actual magazine from everyone just so I could corroborate that this is true. But I asked so many faithful family members and friends, hey, do you have a copy of the Leah Hona that I could look at for a minute? How many of them do you think said, oh, sure, yeah, we get it every month, you can borrow it? No one gets it. No one takes it. Nobody has it in their home.
It's cutting down costs.
I'm just saying, when I was growing up, and maybe you guys were the same with your kids,
oh yeah,
you had all three. You had the Children's Friend, you had the New Era, you had the Ensign or Ensign, depending on how you mispronounce it. Exactly. So anyway, I just have to show you this picture. I don't know if you guys will get it. I think most people in the audience will. This is from conference. It's a conference talk by, let me think, who is it now? I can't remember now who it's from. But the opposite page, they like to show pictures of people at conference, lovely pictures. And this is what they chose. And
so this is supposed to be the May issue.
This is the May issue. And this is Elder, I made a short about it and I knew who it was. Is it Elder Kieran? I think it is Elder Kieran's talk. Yeah. So the opposite page, here it is. For those of you that do not get the reference, a woman.
Who put the Handmaid's Tale in the church magazine?
Exactly. That's it. A long red cloak, hair pulled back, looking up in sort of a celestial way. I just thought, again, they need somebody not only to crop their pictures, but to be aware of popular culture and to say, guys, you don't want to post that because you may not be aware, but I will tell you, what this image invokes for most people. They need somebody like that. I don't know. I'm putting myself out there. I'll send you my resume.
This was no boating accident.
May the Lord open.
This was on purpose.
Open. That's right. Under his eye.
He took the picture, did it knowing what it was, submitted it knowing what it was, and it went through a bunch of people who had no clue what it was, and they ended up posting it in the Ensign to hilarious effect.
I know. I really feel like there's somebody in there that's doing this. And it does go through all the other checks and nobody else knows, but there's someone there that knows. So
it's what I would be doing if I worked there. I mean, did you hear my story about Elder Shelamat?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. If anybody does have a hard copy of the Leah Hona, I'd love for you to look and see if this is,
this is what you were sent.
Yeah. Exactly. And I did double check the talk. It is Elder Kieran's conference talk. So I was able to confirm. So I'm thinking, yes, this is the actual page right next to it.
At the bottom, sometimes they have names of pictures of people who took the pictures, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't, it was kind of cropped off, but I'd love if somebody actually does have the Leah Hona. Like I said, I asked so many friends and family. I assumed someone would have it. Nobody gets it. I'm guessing they read it online, or maybe.
Right, and the problem is online. They don't have all these pictures.
No, they don't. They have, and I checked that too. And they do have some pictures, but not this kind of a picture. But I can see why they'd be attracted to it. It's a beautiful image. She's standing on the banister. But if you're aware at all of what this represents, when religion takes over for bad, the handmaiden, it's just pretty funny. So anyway, interesting.
That's almost as good as Spidey wearing the CES letter button.
That's right. Same thing.
You've got one more slide, I think.
Do I? I do. Yeah, this is an announcement for you to make, Bill, since you're our host tonight.
Well, I'll just note we've got Memorial Day coming up this coming Monday, May 26th, but we will not be here for the newscast. We'll be enjoying our Memorial Day as well. And so we'll see you back in 2 weeks for the Monday following that. I believe that's going to be the first Monday there in
I think
in June.
Yeah, it'll be the first June.
It's just Memorial Day comes early this year.
Yeah. So there's that. So we won't be here next week, but we do want to at least let you know where you can find us. And so what's on the radar? Let me start with what RFM, something you just released this past Saturday. Woo-hoo. And then Rebecca, if you'll tell us what's going on tomorrow night. So RFM?
This ended up being called Lost Doctrine Revealed, The original title that I started with was All Mormons Go to Hell. And that's how I introduce it. But it's wonderful. It's an hour and 7 minutes long. Just went up Saturday night. It's a new RFM. It's number 399. And it's absolutely crazy. It's how all Mormons go to hell if you believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. It's amazing.
I listened to half of it. It was amazing. I have to listen to the other half.
Well, the other half was the best half.
Dang it. I missed it. You don't even know which half I listened to, but
no, I don't.
It was all good.
I stand by my comment anyway.
So on Mormonish, which is always Tuesday night at 6 p.m., we are going to answer the question, there's no way that Joseph Smith was dumb as rocks as they try to paint it. And this is an awesome episode with Doug Vincent. You probably all know who he is. It's called The Erie Canal's Pivotal Influence on Joseph Smith and Mormonism. This blew my mind. We're going to learn what the Erie Canal is, its history, and there's a lot about this wonder of the world of the time period that the church kind of doesn't mention in a lot of its writings about that early day. And there was extreme influence on Joseph Smith and his family. And in fact, the Erie Canal, I'll give you a little teaser, is the reason there even was a burned over district. It was like this perfect storm, and it was all created by the Erie Canal. So you guys are going to love this. Amazing. Tuesday night, 6 p.m. Doug Vincent. It's going to be
all
awesome.
I know about this is I got a mule. Her name is Sal.
That's it. The Erie Canal. No, it was fascinating. Even just to learn about how it was built, you know, aside from Mormonism, it was fascinating.
Do you know that song, Bill? It's an American folk song about the Erie Canal. We used to learn this kind of crap when we were in grade school.
I do not know the song about the...
I got a mule. Her name is Sal. 15 miles, or is it now 15 miles on the Erie Canal. Yep. She's a good old worker and a good old pal. 15 miles on the Erie Canal. Everybody.
Yep. We obviously went to the same school. And Bill's like, I didn't go to that school. I'm so glad.
Oh my gosh. I just feel like the public school system has let our Bill down.
No,
it's unfortunate. I'll just note, I wasn't going to say anything, but somebody did put the comment up here. Loved the newest podcast. I will just note to folks, it's not really Mormon related, so I don't really want to spend a ton of time on it here, but the Almost Awakened podcast is recording content again, and something's going up pretty much every Sunday. This was the episode of last Sunday. We talked about religious trauma and how it affects the nervous system in the body, so that folks could, if they're dealing with things that are sort of still bothering them about the church in terms of physical reactions, emotional reactions, things like that. This was a great episode to have that conversation around. And so thank you, JB Maybe. And then I'll just note in terms of stuff that we've got coming this Wednesday for Mormonism Live. By the way, our start time for Mormonism Live will now be 6 p.m.
Yes.
6 p.m. And so we wanted to note that. So instead of 6:20, it'll be 6 p.m. This will just help us. We had it always be at 6:20 because I got off work at Family Pawn at 6 p.m. Sometimes things would go over a little bit, and so I would never be able to get to a live show at 6 o'clock. So we started at 6:20, but not doing that anymore. So we can start at 6 p.m. Mountain time.
And now hopefully I can keep them all straight.
Yeah, it should be a little easier. The topic
6 and 8.
Yep, the topic this Wednesday, and it's easy because Mormonism After Dark is just a little later. For the older crowd. So Mormon politician exposed as fraud. This is, I got to remember what the gentleman's name, but Douglas Stringfellow. It's right there. Yeah. Douglas Stringfellow. He was the Paul H. Dunn before there was a Paul H. Dunn. And we're going to learn this interesting story on Wednesday. We've got some old video footage of him on This Is Your Life. Which will be sort of fun to watch. And this story has lots of twists and turns. It involves interactions with the first presidency, military stories. It gets kind of crazy. So folks, hopefully we'll see you on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And that's it. Anything else from you guys?
No, but it's been great to be here. Thanks so much for letting me join your merry band.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, RFM. Appreciated the stories you guys brought tonight. Folks, we very much appreciate you tuning in. Please hit the like button, the thumbs up button, the subscribe button, share this with a friend, and donate to Mormonish and to the Mormon Discussion channel in terms of, I'm trying to think of the newscast if we've got a link, but it is in the show notes, I believe. But please support both Rebecca's content as well as RFM and I. And we very much appreciate all of you joining in and being here. And we'll see you in 2 weeks on Monday at 6 p.m. Until then, have a great night.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.